I'm going to be talking a little bit about an interdisciplinary workshop that we created this year. And this was the cover slide for the presentation. I didn't really have a title for it. It was just the interplay between the school, the clinician, and the student, and how the family is at the center of that. And the communication that we have between each other and kind of the burdens that go along with that and potentials for miscommunications, and all of this around IEPs and special education. For me, it was a little bit of a surprise to learn that some of my colleagues in Len did not realize that pediatricians do screening for school, because this is in some ways such a core part of what our well child checks include. So our practice guidelines say very clearly that we should be doing population-based screening for school difficulty, and we're going to come back to what that might mean. And in a national survey, about 98% of pediatricians report that they screen at this blue level at the base, meaning they say, I'm assuming, how's school going? Yeah, so we have further recommendations. The more specialized you get, the more specialized those recommendations. So from the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Children with Disabilities, that the medical home and the primary care physician should be at the center of helping create a plan, an IEP or an IFSP, and collaborating with community resources. They go on to give about a 10-point recommendation, which includes everything to the extent of sitting in on the meetings, reviewing the goals. It's beautiful. And in general, pediatricians in the same national survey feel that they should be knowledgeable at least about the requirements, the majority felt that way, and that they should have some ability to assist families in obtaining this. The problem comes that the majority of pediatricians also feel that they have insufficient training to be able to do this. This is a really complex system within schools. They have, I think it's a wash on who has more acronyms. I feel like we do, but I then did more school training and they might have more acronyms than us. And only 13% of pediatricians were providing actual materials for families. And there was really no difference in trends between residents and long-term practicing physicians. So this is not something that's an old model and a new model. This is something that reflects probably how burdened both series of people, the caregivers, are. So just to orient to the slide, you're not supposed to be able to read it. Each column represents a well child visit, an annual physical. Each dot represents something that should be covered on that physical. This is the subset that's supposed to cover school health. That subset includes all of this information, and school performance is right in the middle. So if you're wondering why more people don't feel comfortable talking about school assessment, those are all components that are supposed to go into that one 10-minute visit. This is a diagram drawn by a family that looks at the complexity of medical care for a child with a disability from their standpoint, and you can see the multiple silos of care both in the school district and how complicated that is, and within the medical field and how complicated that is, which creates silos of care that are ripe for miscommunication from really well-intentioned groups who have put so much into the care of a child, but work within their own individual framework, and as a result can sometimes set families up for miscommunications and missed expectations, especially between the school and medical field, and then lost opportunities for earlier intervention or misinterpretation of what intervention means in the school and in a clinical setting. So my hypothesis was that if you teach residents about this, they will feel more comfortable talking about the process. The hypothesis was not that we would become experts in IEPs in a 3-hour session, but I think that would be so unrealistic and sort of the medical model that we already follow. It's like you get one lecture and you're an expert in that area. So, and a key component for me was that this be interdisciplinary. So the goals that I gave the residents for this workshop, and we'll talk more about that, were the first hour that I did was understanding the differences between school and clinical approach to the same problem, and the problem was very broad. It was school difficulty. And in particular, we talked about learning disabilities, but this can be the difference between medical diagnosis and qualifying diagnosis for an IEP, neuropsych evaluation, and a psychoeducational evaluation, and why it matters that both sides follow the same child with the same diagnosis. Even if you have a wonderful school that does speech therapy, that what that means in a clinical setting. The second hour was specifically on the differences between the IEP and a 504 plan, because those are the most commonly brought up terms. And then the third section for me, my only goal was just that residents touch a physical IEP and have the chance to talk to someone who works in a school district. Just touch it, just see how big it is, because it's ridiculous. So I thought that doing this would increase the likelihood that we would have appropriate engagement between the clinician, the family, and the school. Just do we even talk to each other? And then, do we have empathy for families when we make recommendations like, oh, you should work on that goal in your IEP? What does that even mean to the family? So understanding how complex that system was, seeing it with your own eyes, you might be more likely to make an empathetic and more realistic references to parents or expectations of them when you realize just how complex this system is. So first I recruited from my wonderful Len trainees and some colleagues at the Mind. You've already seen Danielle and Kelsey present. They're experts in this area, and it's just so great to work with them. And TC Silva is also here. She's working on her PhD, and she has experience both in inpatient and outpatient setting of working with students in the hospital. We created a 3-part lesson plan, and this was to be delivered at a pre-existing weekly didactic session for pediatric residents, and this was in March of 2019. When the residents walked in, they were given a survey, and then 6 weeks after, all residents were mailed a survey, which means we actually have 3 subparts. All residents that filled it out, there was 18 there and some medical students. The attendees filled it out, and then in the post-survey, there were those who didn't attend but filled out the post-survey, so 3 groups. I just wanted to establish at the baseline that they also feel that special education and helping families is part of their job. So this is a Likert scale. 2 is strongly agree, 0 is neutral, and all attendees, including those, all attendees and all survey fillers felt that it was at least part of a pediatrician's job. Looking at the 2 main goals, I feel comfortable describing the difference between an IEP and a 504 plan. The pre-survey, so the residents who had not been there, and then the post-survey, the residents who did not attend, both felt uncomfortable regardless of what year they are in residency training, which means some of these residents are going to go out into clinical practice next year. Those who attended the lesson plan felt everything was above 0, felt more comfortable discussing the difference. And this made me a little bit sad. The pre-survey and the non-attendees, I feel comfortable providing resources. So we don't feel comfortable despite 3 years of training because there's so much that goes into the curriculum. 100% of the attendees who responded to the survey strongly agreed that the didactic session was helpful to them. And the conclusions that I have that are the measurable goals are pretty straightforward. Pediatric trainees feel that they should play a role in helping families with special education. Without training, they don't feel comfortable discussing these topics. With focused training, they feel more comfortable discussing these topics at a 6-week follow-up. I feel like the main things for me that are actually the importance of an interdisciplinary approach to working with complex systems of care. And this is especially true when care providers feel isolated and overburdened. And I think overburdened is kind of a negative sounding word. There's so much to do, there's so many care systems that go in together, and instead of seeing the school as someone who with equal buy-in and partnership, we sometimes see them as having different goals from us, or because they're under-resourced, they care less about the kids and we have to advocate. And this can create an adverse approach for the families going into IEP meetings. Everything is stressful enough already in coordinating services without setting up a family to feeling like they need to be defensive against another system that theoretically is there to really care for their child. And having Danielle and Kelsey, it was like excellent way to demonstrate, here's some school people that work in the schools. They're so approachable. These are your allies, not your enemies. And here's a way to share the work that goes into caring for a child rather than feeling like it's all on me and I'm the only expert. So I'd say for future directions in this, for me, I'm leaving California. My future directions all relate to the interdisciplinary teamwork. So who do I partner with in the next school to talk to clinicians in very short segments that are seated in a medical model with the expertise and the presence of someone outside of medicine. I think that just having a school psychologist go into a clinician area and give a talk sometimes feels very separate. So how do we come together in that? So I would like to thank Danielle Christie, Kelsey Oliver, and TC Silva for helping me with this. Could be their project too, but they did their own. The other Len trainees who spent a lot of time going over this and taught me a lot about the importance of interdisciplinary work. And then both Mary Beth Steinfeld, my mentor, and Allison, who went over a lot of this project with me in advance.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was created in 1998 with a promise to find cures for neurodevelopmental disorders. Every day, our physicians and researchers come closer to fulfilling that promise. Their groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other brain disorders are helping children achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.